Imagine a hidden gem, a small bakery tucked away in an old neighborhood. Here, a lone black baker began each day before the sun even thought about rising. One night, a hungry, homeless boy snuck in, desperate to steal a pastry. Caught in the act, he panicked, knocking over a display case and cutting himself on the shattered glass. But instead of calling the police, the baker stepped forward. He bandaged the boy's wound, offered him food and gave him a chance to transform his life. 5 years on, that same boy became a master baker, turning the humble shop into a local legend. Before we dive into this incredible journey, let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing your thoughts in the comments. It was 5:30 in the morning. The streets outside were still sleeping, veiled by a thin fog that hugged the sidewalks and softened the streetlights' orange glow. On the corner of Sycamore and Leland, nestled between a pawn shop and a boarded-up laundromat, stood a narrow brick building. Its faded green awning sheltered a sign, "Sweet Morning Bakery," in peeling white paint. Inside, warm yellow light spilled across the tiled floor, pushing back the lingering chill. The inviting scent of fresh bread and cinnamon hung in the air, a familiar comfort. Jeremiah Carter, a tall black man in his early 50s, stood behind the wooden counter, his hands firm and steady as he rolled dough. Broad-shouldered and quiet, with short salt and pepper curls, his thoughtful gaze seemed to weigh every moment. A long, pale scar stretched from the base of his left thumb past his wrist, an old injury he never spoke of. He wore a plain navy apron dusted with flour and well-worn black work boots. No name tag was needed. Customers here either knew him or quickly learned who he was. Jeremiah had run this bakery for nearly 12 years, pouring all his grief and memories into kneading dough, shaping loaves, and folding pastry since his wife passed. The neighborhood respected him, even if they didn't always know how to talk to him. He was one of those men whose silence spoke as loudly as any shout. The oven timer dinged, a sharp but soft sound in the quiet. Jeremiah turned, carefully removed a tray of golden brioche rolls, and placed them gently on the wire rack. He wiped his hands on a towel tucked into his apron, then reached for the old coffee pot to brew the morning's first round. Outside, the street remained hushed. The bus wouldn't arrive for another half hour, and the regulars wouldn't start trickling in until after 6 o'clock. He glanced at the clock. 5:35. Another early start, another day like all the others. Jeremiah didn't mind the routine. In fact, he relied on it. The morning prep calmed his mind, kept him grounded. There was peace in the dough, in the rhythm of mixing, folding, baking. Here life made sense, quiet, predictable. As the jazz radio began to hum from the speaker above the espresso machine, Jeremiah reached for a bowl of cinnamon filling. His back ached slightly as he leaned forward, but he didn't slow. Every movement was intentional, efficient. He had no employees, preferring the quiet, the lack of distraction. Just him, his work, and the silent city outside that seemed to forget this place existed. Still, he never missed a day, not even when it snowed, not even during last summer's 6-hour power outage. Jeremiah believed in showing up, in doing things the right way even if no one was watching. And that morning, as he shaped a new tray of rolls, he didn't know someone was watching. He didn't hear the rustle behind the alley door, didn't notice the faint shift in the air when the lock gave way, didn't see the shadow move past the pantry shelves in the back. All he knew was that morning was beginning, the dough was rising, and the shop was almost ready to open. A faint creak from the back door, almost too soft to hear, but Jeremiah caught it. His hand paused mid-reach for the cinnamon glaze. He turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing, listening. Another sound, a soft shuffle. Something or someone was moving in the kitchen storage area. Not mice, he knew that sound. This was heavier, human. He set the glaze bowl down, wiped his hands on his apron, and reached under the counter. Not for a weapon, but for the flashlight he kept beside the ledger book. The light clicked on with a soft buzz. Jeremiah moved slowly toward the back, his boots quiet on the tile. His heart didn't race. He wasn't one to panic, but his mind was alert, calculating. The alley door should have been locked. He checked it every night. He passed the pantry, then the walk-in fridge, then the shelves of flour and sugar bins. The motion sensor light in the back hallway flickered on, confirming it. Someone was inside. He rounded the corner and saw him. A teenage boy, thin, dirty, barely more than a shadow in an oversized hoodie, crouched beside the pastry display fridge. One hand clutched a sticky bun, the other reaching into his jacket. The boy looked up. Their eyes locked for a split second. No one moved. The boy's face twisted, shock, guilt, fear. Then he bolted upright and turned to run, but he wasn't fast, not really. His shoes were worn to the soles, and his body looked like it hadn't eaten a full meal in days. As he turned, his foot caught the base of the rolling display rack. The crash was loud, sudden. Glass trays hit the floor one after another. A sharp crack echoed through the bakery. The boy went down hard, his shoulder slamming into the tiles. A split second later he cried out, a raw, panicked yelp. Blood streaked across the floor. One of the broken trays had sliced deep across his forearm. Jeremiah moved before he even thought. The flashlight clattered from his hand. He dropped to one knee beside the boy, already reaching for the towel from his apron. "Don't move," he said, his voice low and firm. The boy's chest heaved, his eyes darting toward the door. He tried to crawl away, but Jeremiah placed one hand gently on his good shoulder. "You're bleeding," Jeremiah said. "You need to stay still." "Please, I didn't mean to, I swear I was just hungry. I wasn't going to, please don't call the cops." The boy's voice was shaking, real panic. Jeremiah pressed the towel against the boy's arm, firm but not rough. The blood seeped through almost instantly. The boy whimpered. "I'm sorry, man, I didn't know anybody was in here. I just saw the light and I ain't eaten since yesterday morning." His voice cracked, his breath coming in short, uneven bursts. "You homeless?" Jeremiah asked, not unkindly. The boy hesitated, then nodded once. "Name?" The boy swallowed. "Tarek," he whispered. Jeremiah looked at him, truly looked, beyond the grime in the hoodie and the panic. This was a kid no more than 18, maybe 17. His eyes were tired, not from staying up late but from staying on guard. "Tarek," Jeremiah said slowly, "you're hurt and I ain't calling the cops." Tarek looked up, confused. "You're not." Jeremiah shook his head. "You already paid for that sticky bun in blood. Seems like enough for one morning." He reached over and grabbed a roll of gauze from the first aid box under the prep counter. "This will sting," he warned, and began wrapping the boy's arm. Tarek sat still now, too tired to run, too confused to speak. Jeremiah worked in silence, wrapping carefully, checking the wound. It was deep but not dangerous. When he finished, he stood and walked to the sink, washing the blood from his hands. "You like cinnamon rolls?" he asked without turning around. Tarek blinked. "What?" "I asked if you like cinnamon rolls." Yeah," Tarek said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Good. Sit tight." Jeremiah moved toward the front, grabbed a clean plate and scooped 2 warm rolls from the tray. He poured a glass of milk, walked back and set them down on the table near where Tarek sat on the floor. Then he pulled a stool out and sat across from him. "Eat," he said simply. Tarek stared. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice raw now, shaky. "You don't even know me." Jeremiah looked at him and said nothing for a long moment. Then quietly, "You hungry?" "That's enough." The words hung in the air. Outside, the street was starting to wake, but inside that bakery, in the quiet before the doors unlocked, a boy who had nothing sat across from a man who had lost much. Neither of them knew yet how much they were about to give to each other. The cinnamon roll was still warm when Tarek picked it up. His fingers trembled slightly, not just from the cut on his arm, but from something deeper. Something that came from being chased too long, from sleeping too many nights on concrete. He took a small bite at first, as if expecting someone to snatch it away. Jeremiah didn't say a word. He just sat across from him, arms resting on his knees, eyes steady, patient. The boy chewed slowly, then faster, then he finished the first roll in 3 messy bites, licking the icing from his fingers. He didn't touch the milk, his body didn't trust liquid yet. Jeremiah didn't move, didn't ask questions. He knew enough. When you're that hungry, you don't talk, you just eat. After a while, Tarek leaned back against the wall and stared at the floor. His breathing was calmer now, but his eyes looked like they were holding something back, something big. "I've been on the street for 2 weeks, he said suddenly, "ever since my aunt kicked me out." His voice was quiet, thin, like he was still deciding if he was allowed to speak. "My mom, she passed last year. She was only 42. My aunt took me in for a while but then said I was too much to feed. I tried sleeping on my cousin's couch, but he got scared I'd get him in trouble, so I left." He glanced up, unsure if Jeremiah was still listening. Jeremiah nodded once, eyes fixed on him, not pitying, just listening. "I tried applying at the fast food place on Lexington," Tarek continued. But the manager looked me up and down and told me they ain't hiring boys who look like they got a record. I don't got a record. He paused. I never stole anything before, never, I swear. His voice broke and he looked away. I was just so damn hungry. His shoulders tensed and for a second he tried to swallow it, but he couldn't. The tears came slowly, silently. No sobbing, no drama, just quiet streams down a boy's face who hadn't had a reason to cry in front of anyone in years. Jeremiah stayed where he was. He didn't lean in, didn't speak. He just let the boy cry. He understood. There was a difference between pain and shame, and sometimes people needed to spill both before they could breathe. After a long silence, Tarek wiped his face with his sleeve. You probably think I'm weak. Jeremiah shook his head. I think you're alive. That counts. He stood slowly and walked over to the utility closet. When he returned, he was holding a mop, a bucket, and a pair of old rubber gloves. He set them down near the broken glass, then he looked Tarek in the eye. You want a job? Tarek blinked. What? You heard me, Jeremiah said calmly. You want to work. You clean that mess. You show up here every morning at 5. You don't steal from me, you don't lie to me. You learn what I teach you. You earn what you keep. That's the deal. But I don't know anything about baking, Tarek stammered. Jeremiah shrugged. You know how to follow directions? Yeah. Then you'll learn. The boy looked at him unsure. His hands were still trembling, his head was low, like he didn't trust that this was real. Why would you do that after what I did? Jeremiah picked up the glass of milk, handed it to him. Because someone gave me a shot once and I figure the world don't break even, but we can try. Tarek took the glass slowly like it might disappear. Then he looked around the shop, at the floor he'd stained with blood, the trays he'd shattered, the quiet man offering him something he hadn't felt in months, a second chance. He stood up, steadying himself. The cut on his arm ached, but the pain felt distant now. Something else was louder, something inside him that had been numb for too long was waking up. He took the mop, looked at the glass and nodded. Hey, he said. I'll clean it. Good, Jeremiah said, turning toward the oven as the next timer went off. Start there. We open in 30 minutes. The radio kept playing soft jazz in the background as the smell of rising bread filled the air. It was still early, the city hadn't quite woken up. But inside Sweet Morning Bakery, something had already begun. The first few mornings were tough. Tarek arrived just before 5, shoulders hunched from the cold, eyes still shadowed with doubt. He didn't talk much and Jeremiah didn't push. They worked mostly in silence. Jeremiah focused on the bread, Tarek on wiping counters, sweeping corners, scrubbing the kitchen floor until it smelled of lemon and soap. Every task was given seriously, every mistake corrected plainly. There was no yelling, no praise either, just a quiet expectation that things be done right. On the 5th day, Jeremiah handed him a recipe card. It was smudged with oil, the handwriting neat but firm. Honey rolls, 2 dozen. Tarek looked at it for a long moment. You want me to try this? He asked. Jeremiah nodded once. Read it twice, then start. Tarek moved slowly at first, measuring flour with care, uncertain if the scoop was too much or not enough. He stirred the yeast too cold and the dough didn't rise. Jeremiah didn't scold him. He simply slid a bowl next to him and said, Try again. Warmer water, not hot. And so it went. Mistake learned, try again. Weeks passed. Tarek began arriving earlier, standing a little straighter. He started asking questions. When do you score the bread like that so it rises right and don't crack ugly? Jeremiah answered, Bread got memory. It'll split where you tell it or where it wants to. Another morning, why do you weigh the butter? So you don't waste. So it bakes even. How long do I need it? Till your arms get tired, then need 10 more seconds. There was no shortcut, no machine to do it for them, just hands, heat, patience and time. Customers began noticing him. That your nephew? Someone asked. Jeremiah only said, That's my apprentice. On Sundays when the shop closed early, Jeremiah showed him how to make croissants from scratch. 2 days of folding and chilling butter and dough layered with care. Tarek burned the first batch. The second batch he underbaked. The third came out golden, crisp, perfect. He smiled without realizing it. Jeremiah noticed, said nothing, just nodded toward the cooling rack. One Thursday morning, a woman in scrubs came in early. She pointed at the raspberry tarts in the case and said, These look new. Tarek made those, Jeremiah said simply. The woman bought 2. She came back the next morning and bought 4 more. Word spread. By the time summer rolled in, Tarek was behind the counter taking orders, remembering regulars' names. He worked the register with the same precision he used to knead dough. His hoodie was gone, he wore a clean apron now. On a warm afternoon in July, Jeremiah handed him a key. "What's this for?" Tarek asked. "You open tomorrow," Jeremiah said, wiping his hands on a towel. "You earned it." Tarek stared at the key, lips parted, eyes wide. "You serious?" "I don't hand out keys for fun," Jeremiah replied. "Be here before 5. Don't burn the sourdough." Tarek nodded, clutching the key tight in his palm. "I won't." That night he slept at the shelter with the key tucked under his pillow, like it was made of gold. The next morning the oven was already hot when Jeremiah arrived. The lights were on, the dough was rising, and Tarek was standing at the counter, sleeves rolled, flour on his nose, humming low to the same old jazz station Jeremiah always played. Jeremiah walked in, took a look around, and didn't say a word. He just tied his apron and got to work. That was how it went for the next year. Quiet, steady, relentless. They didn't talk about the past, they didn't need to. The work said everything. By the end of that year, Tarek could make anything on the menu and 3 things that weren't. He had regular customers who came in just for his lemon scones. A local food blog wrote a piece called "From Dough to Destiny," the young baker reviving an old shop. The photo showed him smiling, arms crossed, standing in front of the counter. Jeremiah wasn't in the picture, but Tarek mentioned him 3 times in the article. One evening as they closed up, Tarek turned to him and said, "You think I could teach kids? Like a weekend class or something? There's a few boys at the shelter, they watch me every time I go in with leftovers." Jeremiah nodded. "Start with 1 class, Saturdays. Keep it simple. I'll use the back tables. Clean up after you better," Jeremiah said. "I ain't picking up your mess." They both smirked, the closest thing to laughter they'd ever shared. In the corner of the bakery, behind the pastry case, an old photograph hung on the wall. A younger Jeremiah in uniform standing with a group of Marines all lined up straight. Below it, a small wooden plaque read, "Discipline, Integrity, Grace Under Pressure." Tarek looked at it often now, not because it reminded him of the military, but because it reminded him of the kitchen and the man who taught him how to build a life out of broken mornings and hot bread. It was 5 years to the day since Tarek had first stepped into Sweet Morning Bakery through the back door. 5 years since he'd slipped on the tile, bleeding and terrified, unsure whether that morning would end with sirens or mercy. Now he stood at the front of the bakery in a clean white chef coat, sleeves rolled, apron tied sharp at the waist. The shop was buzzing. Children filled the back tables, flour on their hands and joy in their voices. Some stood on stools to see over the counters. Others leaned in as Tarek explained how to crack an egg clean, how to fold dough without overworking it, how to let the butter do the talking. He moved from table to table with ease, correcting posture, praising effort. His voice was clear, calm, confident. "Take your time. Let the dough rest. But don't forget who's in charge. You are." The kids nodded like he was teaching them more than baking, and he was. Each Saturday morning class started the same way. Tarek would gesture toward the framed photo behind the counter. Jeremiah in uniform, eyes focused, standing in a line of soldiers. Next to it now was a second frame. Tarek smiling with his arms crossed in front of the bakery, flanked by 2 grinning boys from the shelter who had baked their first loaves just a week before. Beneath that photo hung a wooden sign, painted by hand, the brush strokes uneven but proud. "Legacy is not what you leave, it's who you lift." That quote, the kids would learn, was something Jeremiah said once, quietly, without looking up from a tray of rolls. But Tarek had never forgotten it. The bakery had changed. The counter was still wooden and worn, but now the display case held rows of pastries that bore Tarek's signature. Mango danishes, honey biscuits, chocolate pepper muffins. Local chefs dropped in for inspiration. Food bloggers tagged the location like a secret treasure. But Jeremiah didn't care about that. He still arrived at 5, still swept the corners no one noticed, still drank his coffee black and unsweetened. He let Tarek have the front of the house, that was the deal. The boy had become the baker, and Jeremiah was content to be the quiet force behind it. One morning, after the kids had cleaned up and gone, Tarek stayed behind. Sunlight fell soft through the window, lighting up the flour still dancing in the air. He stood behind the counter, folding his apron, when Jeremiah came out from the back with a mop. "You don't have to clean up today," Tarek said, grinning. "The kids left it spotless." Jeremiah didn't look up. "There's always something," he said. "Besides, I need the exercise." Tarek hesitated, then leaned on the counter watching him. "You ever think about how different things could have gone?" Jeremiah paused, then nodded once. "Every day." "You didn't have to help me," Tarek said. "I could have been gone in 10 seconds, never seen you again." "You could have," Jeremiah replied. "But you didn't." He leaned the mop against the wall and looked up at him, his eyes steady. "You stayed. You worked. You earned every piece of this." Tarek's voice softened. "Still, I don't know where I'd be if it wasn't for you." Jeremiah looked at him for a long moment, then he shook his head. "You're looking at it wrong. I didn't save you. I gave you space. You did the saving." Tarek nodded slowly, understanding in a way he hadn't when he was younger. He walked to the wall behind the counter where his old apron still hung on a hook, the same one Jeremiah gave him the first morning. Stitched into the chest was a patch he'd added last year in small navy thread, "Sweet Morning, Jeremiah's Legacy." He took it down, folded it carefully, and placed it in a shadow box they'd been meaning to hang. "You good with this going up?" he asked. Jeremiah shrugged. "Ain't my name that matters." "No," Tarek said, "but it's the reason everything here does." That afternoon they hung the box together, side by side with the other frames. They didn't speak much, they didn't need to. Later, when the shop had closed and the sun dipped low behind the city skyline, Tarek stood at the doorway, locking up. He looked out at the street, once cold and unfamiliar, now home. Behind him the smell of bread still lingered, warm and alive. He turned and saw Jeremiah wiping down the last table, moving slow but sure. "See you tomorrow," Tarek said. Jeremiah nodded without looking up. "5 sharp," he said. "Don't be late." Tarek smiled, stepped outside and pulled the door closed behind him. For the first time in a long time he didn't feel like he was chasing anything. He felt whole, rooted, seen. A boy who had nothing had found his place in the world, not through charity, not through luck, but through work, through grace, through one man who believed that second chances weren't given. They were built, brick by brick, roll by roll, morning by morning.